Internet animation has always been something I've appreciated, from the silly video game parodies of Sonic for Hire and the Awesome series, to the comedic sketches performed in Edgeworld and Homestar Runner, to the storytime animations like those of Swoozie and Jane Animations, to the mainstream examples like How It Should Have Ended and Side Night and Happiness, to the collaboration scene with Castle Calamities or reanimated projects, to impressive fight animations like those in Hune's Dojo, Death Battle, and Super Mario Bros. Z, to the full-on series like Ruby, Tome, Camp Camper, Hell of a Boss. Even if some of them haven't aged the best, I feel as if all of them are important to a culture, stating that everyone and anyone can animate, and everyone and anyone can enjoy it. And in 2012, Google seemed to see it too, when they launched the YouTube Original Channel Initiative. This initiative was a $100 million funded program to make original content for Google and to put onto Google TV. It started with 100 channels by September 2012, and an additional 60 channels were added by November. And it was a Google decision. How do you think it went? In November 2012, Google pulled funding out of more than 60% of the channels in that initiative because they weren't making enough money. From then on, YouTube kept the incoming revenue from these channels because they were YouTube. Of course they would. And by November 2013, the landing page for the initiative became a 404 error one, making a lot of people think that Google decided to sweep it under the rug. Not all of them failed. I mean, the initiative made Crash Course and Cartoon Hangover, but a lot of them lost motivation along the way and quit. One channel that got on this was Smosh, one of the most subscribed, if not the most subscribed channel at the time, which decided to branch out with Shut Up Cartoons. It was made to be a collection of internet animations made by either individual creators or independent animation groups, with a lot of them being approved and produced by the creators of Smosh themselves. Surprisingly, despite getting over 2 million subscribers, Smosh and DeFi Media claimed that this channel was a failure. It's possibly because of viewer burnout, but we'll talk about that later. And from a critical perspective, there's a lot of reasons it's not really remembered super fondly. My goal with this video is to give my personal critique on the show, along with insight into the history and reception of them, as well as what the creators are doing nowadays. So strap yourselves in, because it's time for the Shut Up Cartoons Retrospective. The first cartoon that was ever shown off was Do's and Don'ts, a show about kids learning messages about life. But instead of family-friendly stuff like stealing or telling the truth, they learn more about adult themes like plastic surgery, veganism, rap, and ritualistic sacrifice. They're guided by an omnipresent narrator telling them what to do and why to do it. One thing that the Smosh crew really tried to push was that they got real kids to voice the kids, and make them say dirty stuff. And I mean, it's fine. Like, I don't really care about it one way or another, but cool for them. Out of all the Shut Up cartoons, this one is one of the most popular ones overall, with millions of views. One thing that immediately shows itself is the aesthetic of the show. It's, not the best. It's clear with the character designs that they were trying to do something similarly to South Park, with rough animation and character designs but good comedy. But either way, sometimes the design of the characters is weird looking and uncanny, and while they look relatively fine in stills, the animation is where they suffer the most. They move really stiffly, and it's not as appealing or as charming as something like South Park. The backgrounds are sometimes well done, but sometimes they're completely distracting with lighting and such. But the worst part, in my opinion, is most things involving texture transitions. They're either hard to read without straining your eyes, or they feel like they're much lesser quality compared to even the character animation, by feeling like default text effects. But looking good isn't important if the writing can salvage it, so how's the writing? It's alright. The kids are fine, nothing too special in most episodes, but some are pretty good in others, like the veganism episode or the prison episode, for their naivete or general reactions to what's going on. The main star is the narrator who orchestrates these events for the characters to go through, and has some really funny lines about why the kids should do what they do. He's stylized like a passive-aggressive early TV narrator, and the style definitely fits for this show. The show is more focused on shock value rather than comedy, but I'd say it's comparable to South Park, when you're comparing an internet cartoon to one of the most successful cartoons ever, that is. If you binge the entire show, the comedy does get repetitive, so my recommendation is to watch it occasionally from time to time. Despite the fact that it's usually around 3 minutes long, the way that the episodes are paced are well done enough that you don't mind the time passing by. Sometimes it may drag through and make it seem like 6 minutes instead, but overall, it's a decent show. It's not spectacular, but it's fine for what it is. I find it rather strange that it was nominated for a Best Animated Web Series award from the International Academy of Web Television, but different strokes for different folks. The creator, F. Ryan Oman, made a show called A Children's Guide to Growing Up, which is where the idea for this initial show came from. He went on to make a show called Skulls of the Shogun. The most interesting one is when he went on to make a not as successful show called Amerikids, and by that I mean it has 140 views regularly. It really is a shame because it seems like being a part of Smosh is what made his content so appreciated. Then again, it seems like a hobby at this point, since he's also a professional trainer. So what is Amerikids about? It's essentially a microcosm of current events, and the cast going through them that's explicitly political.
I had a question about your son and his ties to foreign money and influence. My question was about your penis size. Is it above average or, like, really above average?
The cast seems relatively normal for kids, I guess, or at least kid stereotypes, but there are three that stick out, and not for the right reasons. These two, right here, they're... do I have to say it? SJWs. One of them is supposed to be a super sheltered snowflake that doesn't experience the outside world, and one of them is a 7-year-old joke about finding everything offensive and being in lockstep with Democrats. The most insulting one is one of the main characters from Do's and Don'ts being the voice of reason in the cast, basically agreeing with every point the show is trying to make. It's, not good.
Pubertina, where's this blood coming from?
Pubertina started out as a pilot made by Emily Brunage, as a music video starring a girl going through puberty and being scared of the changes in her body. It was decently liked, and when Shut Up Cartoons announced that it'd be part of the lineup of cartoons initially revealed, many people who liked the pilot were excited for it. But when it released, it got lots of negative reception. Like, you know how the story of Turning Red was hated for its depiction of something like growing pains? Yeah, something like that. Compared to the pilot, many said it had worse quality overall. And yeah, I could kind of see it, but not to the level of mass disliking the first season as harshly as it got. It was so harsh that it was the only Shut Up cartoon to have likes and dislikes disabled. On the day that the second episode was released, an unlisted video was published called Why You No Like Me, which was a 12-minute long video about Pubertina crying and asking why nobody likes her. And that video probably has the most visible dislikes of any of the Shut Up cartoons. It was bizarre. Unfortunately, there was another reason why, and it has to do with the concept of the show, about a girl going through puberty. Similarly to something like Big Mouth Today, Pubertina got lots of flack for being a show about a girl going through puberty. On the one hand, I can understand that not everyone wants to watch a show like that, especially the initial demographic of Smosh, but on the other hand, it doesn't really focus entirely about the girl going through puberty, as there were many episodes that were just Pubertina having fun. Not to mention, shows like these deserve to have a platform, and disliking it just because it's about puberty is messed up, especially when, unlike Big Mouth, Pubertina doesn't go into too many specific details. But needless to say, despite the fact that the second season got a more positive reception, many consider this to be the most polarizing Shut Up cartoon out there. What are my thoughts on it? It's fine. A bit more boring than other Shut Up cartoons, but it's fine. It's sort of a shame to say that, because there is actually a lot to like about the show. The writing is decent and more varied compared to Do's and Don'ts. In fact, I'm confused with how the hate emerged for this show after only 2 episodes. The first episode is really good with a fun music number. The second episode has definitely less quality overall though, but I still find it charming in an ironic sense. It reminds me of Lemon and Bill and Knock Force, even if it isn't as good as those ones. And that generally describes how the writing is, either ironically charming or unironically good. But there was definitely a shift in the second season, as more of the episodes became a consistent quality. Sometimes the show goes through style changes, like in the Could You Spare Me a Tampon song, and it's always nice to see. In fact, most of the songs aren't half bad. Unfortunately, not everything is sunshine and rainbows, as there are a few flaws in the show. First, the pacing can be kinda slow, even compared to other Shut Up cartoons, and sometimes it's a drag to watch. Sometimes the expressions of the characters don't match the voices, and while I find it ironically enjoyable, I don't know if other people would necessarily feel the same way. It sometimes gets kinda gross, after all it's a show about puberty, and it can be off-putting to watch. The characters are really nice, most of the time. Pubertina does a good job as a leading lady, and she's interesting enough to have as a protagonist. The side characters are pretty much one note, but they do their jobs. In fact, there's one side character who's revealed to be gay in the Valentine's Day episode. He actually gets together with his crush, and throughout the series, they're just a really positive gay couple, and it's really charming. In fact, this is probably one of the only Shut Up cartoons that don't really use being gay as a joke about sexual stuff, and it's really lovely. But then there's Debbie. In some episodes, she works well as a sidekick to the main character's shenanigans, or even getting her own conflict, but other times she's terrible. She's a character who seemingly yells a lot, and sometimes her voice gets grating, especially when she sings. but other times she's obsessively stalking Pubertina and it's creepy and disgusting, especially when you find out that she has a crush on Pubertina. But finally, there's the big bomb, that being that there's a stuffed dog that Pubertina has that's suicidal, and it's really uncomfortable to watch due to how realistically the dog actually acts. But overall, there's a lot of stuff to like about the show, but there's a lot to dislike about it. While some of the polarization is really unnecessary, some of it I can understand. And at the end of the day, I find it a little below par compared to Do's and Don'ts in terms of overall quality, and even then, I would rather revisit an episode of this show than I would Do's and Don'ts. I'm glad that Emily Brunich is doing better with her career though, as she's helped write some episodes of Amphibia, Star vs, DC Superhero Girls, an episode of Hilda, and some bigger roles in Making Harvey Street Kids and a short called Goldie, so check her out. Before I continue even further though, there's a video released on the Shut Up Cartoons channel about the making of Pubertina, and through this video, you see all the steps and hard work that people like Emily Brunich and Paul Frazier put into the show, and you know what, I'll say this, I will complain a lot about shows in the future. Some shows I like, some shows I dislike, and some shows I get bored by, but know one thing, I will never disrespect the creative process anyone goes through when making these shows. Zombies vs. Ninjas is the final cartoon of the original 3 Shut Up cartoons, and it's not bad at all. Created by Michael Granberry, the show is about, well, ninjas fighting against zombies in the apocalypse. It's a very basic premise and the show does well with it, dealing with people that control the zombies, people that protest the ninjas keeping them safe, and lots of different problems. Along the way, they meet up with a wacky scientist who's revealed to have made the ninjas in the first place, and someone who makes wacky inventions that sometimes get out of hand. And that's basically it. The animation is stop motion here, and I think that the show does a pretty good job at making it fast-paced and humorous. Michael Cranberry has been known for his stop motion before the show, doing animations for Mad and Mary Shelley's Frankenhole, and his talents definitely show here. The action, while I wouldn't say it's groundbreaking, it's definitely something entertaining to watch. The characters are all pretty varied in personality, and they've got really nice line delivery, and they're written as really funny characters, though a lot of the time their asshole-ish nature does seep in more. I think the variety in characters is pretty funny, as none of them are actually Asian. One is American, one is Deep South American, one is Russian, one is girl, and one is English. Or I think he's English. His whole thing is that his puppets talk for him, and it's the one piece of fluid mouth motion in the show, instead of just changing mouths occasionally, or just not doing anything like they did for the ninjas. Not only that, but I will say that the script writing does hit a few good notes too. Like, it doesn't always hit, but the one thing I will say is that the humor is spot on. Comparing this to the kind of predictable humor of Do's and Don'ts, and with the half-ironic enjoyment of Pubertina, this feels unique and refreshingly fast-paced. There is definitely a bit of cruelty to it though, and sometimes it does do political commentary, though it's more on the anti-intellectualism of people, as a running theme more often than not. At least it's not as unsubtle as Amerikids. My only issue with the series is the fact that these episodes are twice as long as the other Shut Up cartoons, and sometimes it can be a real drag to sit through, but it's still a very good ride overall. As for Michael Cranberry, he got a lot of good work after Zombies vs. Ninjas, including animating on Adventure Time and Robot Chicken, which was a surprisingly good mashup. He even animated for Anomalisa, one of the most intricate, mature, and well-made animated movies of all time, though his most successful work is animating for a preschool show called Tumbleweed, in which he's had 3 award wins and 4 other nominations. So that's good for him.
Krogzilla, the monster who got downsized.
After the first 3 shows were released, these next 2 were aired on the Tuesday and Thursday slots respectively, and we started off with Krogzilla. The theme song explains the show perfectly. He used to be a giant monster, but he got downsized, literally, and now has to look for human work. Overall, the reception to this show was really positive. While it wasn't necessarily as heavy of a hitter as the first 3 in terms of views, it still amassed a lot of attention. It's gotten so much that it's the only one to actually have a Wikipedia article. Thank goodness for that though, because I can actually talk about the history of the show with more detail. The creator of the show was Corey Edwards, known for directing the film Hoodwinked. He later made a webcomic called Roger Cosmonkey in 2012, but all the way back in December of 2011, he is cooking up this animated series, which was then announced on April 2012 for Shut Up Cartoons. Enough history for now though. Is the praise well deserved? Short answer, yes. Long answer, yeah, pretty much. Krogzilla's best aspect by far is the writing. The show relies on dialogue being really good, and thankfully this show lives up to that expectation. The dialogue behind the show is really well made, and really helps make a lot of funny and even heartwarming moments. The characters play off each other really well too. Krogzilla especially reminds me of BoJack Horseman in his mannerisms and mentality. He's self-serving and grumpy a lot of the time, but you can see that he still tries to achieve his goals and find out where he belongs, though it doesn't necessarily work all the time. In fact, a lot of the show reminds me of BoJack Horseman Season 1, in its writing and its animation. Yeah, the animation of the show isn't really the best, but it's clear that the writing is the main focus. The only problem with it is the fact that apparently the Smosh crew wanted to limit the dialogue, and because of that, episodes feel a whole lot shorter than they usually would. Back to Krogzilla himself. He has a few foils, with the most noticeable one being Jeff, a barnacle that lives on Krogzilla, and essentially tells him to man up. He is suggested to the show by Corey Edwards' wife, and does a really good job, though he's sometimes annoying. There's also Marcus, a human who sees the situation that Krogzilla is in, and tries to help him out however he can. Finally, there's Regurgisaurus, who ends up being his more successful rival, similarly to Mr. Peanut Butter, but with less naivete and more Squilliam-like arrogance. Most notably though, compared to most shut-up cartoons, it has some of the most entertaining scenes, along with some of the most consistent quality. It's such a clever show that's such a good watch compared to some of the rest. Specifically, episode 10 is one of the episodes I rewatch a lot, just because of how uplifting it is overall. Krogzilla finds a new purpose in deconstruction, and the episode feels like a strong note to end the show on with his overall happiness. So yeah, it's a good show. So much so that USA Today listed it as one of its best online animated web series of the time. It was even one of the only shows nominated for Best Animated Web Series by the International Academy of Web Television, the other one being Do's and Don'ts, and both of them losing to Red vs. Blue of all things. The creator has a website for updates on what he's doing, and worked on a show called Fearless after this cartoon aired. Snowjacked. From the heavens to the hells. Snowjacked is a show that overall had a mixed reception. Some people said it was nice, while many others said that it was either slightly less bad or more bad than Pubertina Season 1. While I definitely admit that I kinda liked Season 1, even I could admit that comparing a show to that one is not good. What do I think of the show? Ugh. I do not like this show. I'll be honest though, there's not a lot to talk about. So the plot of this show is that a girl named Leda is trying to find her Snowjacked family and teams up with a guy named Durf, who has experience with the mountains. Along the way, they meet a crazy scientist named Jane and her husband Brent, and that's it. It's a running joke where they don't actually explain what being Snowjacked means, but it disgusts everyone regardless. But that also leads to a problem. The concept of the show is barely utilized in said show. What this means is that there are a lot of cases where Leda keeps on asking Durf for help finding her family, only for the plot to derail into something else. It gets really annoying really fast, and it feels like that part of the show is completely irrelevant. Heck, by the last episode, Leda just gives up and returns to the mountain because the mountain followed her. Also, the show ends with them dying and blaming the audience for it. Yeah. The draw of this show is supposed to be the zany wacky stuff that happens in the mountain, kinda like Gravity Falls, and I'll admit there are a few things I found that were sometimes ironically funny, like in episode 9, but there's not much to keep you interested, as the time for this show is way too short to flesh out anything. At least the characters have okay personalities, but the writing for the show couldn't be any more uncompelling. Finally, out of all the shows so far, this one probably has the worst animation. This is also where some ironic fun can be had, but it's mostly stiff and unappealing. They all look like cardboard, and that's pretty much all that there is to say. There isn't anything else of note in the show, and it's the lowest note that we have so far. The creators of the show are Kelsey Abbott and John Olsen. There wasn't much I could find on John Olsen, but Kelsey Abbott has a pretty good reputation. Previously, she worked help on Doc and Marty, The Origins of Rick and Morty, and after, she wrote for Uncle Grandpa, Apple and Onion, and wrote the entirety of 12 Forever. That is, separately, but together they've actually worked on a variety of projects, like Professor Pup's History Without Error, James Train, and our RoboCop remake. In any case, Snowjacked is a bottom tier show.
My name is Dr. Michael W. Hollingsworth, and welcome to Nature Break.
Alright, now it's time for the next 3 shows on the Monday, Wednesday, and Friday blocks. First off is Nature Break. Honestly, not too bad, and most people agreed, giving it a positive reception overall. The concept of the show is that it presents itself like a nature show, with a narrator and different animals and such, but it uses these different animals as ones that perform different skits, that end in the animals dying and the narrator moving on. I feel as if the show conceptually could feel pretty rushed, but execution-wise, this is probably the best paced one we have so far. It takes advantage of its short time frame and changes things up so efficiently that it's an okay watch in all honesty. The segments include ones with Rusty the Chameleon and Wayne the Sloth, who just hang out in the jungle, Katie and Graham the Crabs, who hang out by the beach, Ryan and Johnny the Cockroaches, who live in the city, Susie, Lily, and Emily, the llamas hanging out in the plains, and Bernie and Matt the anglerfish hiding in the deep. And the narrator, Dr. Michael W. Hollingsworth, is also pretty entertaining, as his ramblings do connect plot-wise, while taking us from segment to segment. A lot of the humor comes from the animals doing animal stuff and their reactions to it. While some of them aren't, you can see it working for the characters chosen, unlike Snowjacked. Out of all the shorts, apparently people hated the anglerfish ones the most, and while I didn't necessarily find them as interesting as the others, they all have a level of intrigue that keeps the writing smart. That's another thing I like about the show, it's smart. It takes the dialogue-focused nature of something like Krogzilla and gives it a humorous twist. It's a show that doesn't really get tiring to watch, unlike something like Do's and Don'ts or Pubertina for instance. It got my attention and it kinda makes the time fly by with its excellent pacing. I do kinda like the art style. Sure, it's simplistic in a lot of places, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I wouldn't say it was amazing, but they're all at least nice to look at, and all the animals and locations are visually distinct from one another. Unfortunately, because they're so different from one another, I can't really say much about the show overall other than those things. So yeah, I'd say check it out if it's something that intrigues you. It's not the smartest show, nor is it my favorite in the lineup, but I still find it overall enjoyable. The creator's name was Mike Hollingsworth. Yes, the narrator. And he ended up working with more adult themes than animals, and he became the supervising director to BoJack Horseman and Tuca and Birdie. Wow, that's an improvement. After the last Wednesday show, that being Pubertina, the most hated shut-up cartoon so far, people had slightly higher hopes for Weasel Town, but only slightly. The trailer for the show was massively disliked, and so were most of the episodes in general. It still found a generally niche audience that liked it though, as it had overall more likes than dislikes. Definitely mixed by audience standards, but like I've said before, I don't find Pubertina to be too bad. Like, it's not the best, but I found it okay. So maybe the fact that audiences seem to like Weasel Town is more of a good sign? Weasel Town is nothing. It's so unbearably nothing that I feel like the eternity that I have after death is more content than the show provides. But first off, what do I mean by nothing? Well, the plot of the show is that Dipster the cat and Haunches the dog, who might sound familiar to you Gravity Falls fans,
So that's what's with the sweater. Why would a son need to wear sunglasses?
live together, and Dipster has crazy schemes that come up often that he wants to do for one reason or another, and that's basically it. First off, yeah, neither of the characters are weasels, and there are basically no other recurring characters. Neither of them are that interesting either. It's just the not so down to earth guy and the down to earth guy. And second off, there are a few problems with the show. The first one being that, from a writing standpoint, it's pretty bland. Nothing truly interesting happens in any of these episodes. As an example, episode 1 is about Dipster putting on a bunch of coats so he can pilot a robot clone of himself standing in for him at a funeral. He does it, end of episode. Episode 9 is about Dipster making a fake air balloon ride. He does it, and it doesn't work, end of episode. You think I'm giving you a plot synopsis of these episodes and leaving out specific details, but no, this is all that happens. There aren't really any good jokes, lines, or moments other than what happens in the actual episode. Like, at least Snowjacked had some ironically funny moments. This has nothing. And that leads to problem 2. The pacing is so slow. Shut-up cartoons are slow-paced in general, so I had a lot of them playing at 1.5 speed. For this one, I cranked it up to 2, and I still felt bored. In comparison, here's a clip from Sonic for Hire.
Let's watch the surveillance tape of me making Eggman's food. And freeze it. Looks like Eggman ordered this special sauce.
Oh man, that is awesome! Hey, isn't this Earthworm Jim's TV?
Yeah, I'm a dick.
Now here's one of roughly the same length from Weasel Town.
I built it from scratch. It's got surround sound, Blu-ray, 802.11n Wi-Fi connection, and a Weber grill.
Where did you learn how to build a robot?
Who said anything about a robot? It's a suit. That's how I'm gonna travel to Sean's funeral.
As a comparison, Sonic for Hire covers a lot more jokes, with quick pacing compared to Weasel Town, explaining a single plot point. And finally, there's the show's audio and visual design. That intro card audio is heard so many times and is used so many times that I would say it's definitely mildly annoying. The voice for Dipster is so slow that you could blame him for at least half of the show's slow pacing. Speaking of, Dipster looks like a Garfield creepypasta, and Haunches looks like he was just run over by a truck. A lot of the visuals border on the line of seizure-inducing with how much flashing there is in them. I don't want to disrespect anybody here who put work into this project, but this feels lazy. While in all technicality, it has better production values than Snowjacked. Not only did Snowjacked actually have a few interesting and ironically enjoyable moments, but I like Snowjacked more than Weasel Town. In any case, who made this show? We have Eric Filipowski, who did work for SpongeBob and Drunk History after this, and Nathan Hamill, who made a Tenacious D documentary, and some work on Office Ninja. It doesn't seem like they're doing too bad for themselves. And at the end of the day, the production of this show alone is at least professional enough for them to have on their resumes, so I won't say anything further about it. Out of every single show in this retrospective, there is no other show that has received as much hype as Oishi High School Battle. From the trailer on the official Smosh channel called Oishi Will Kick Your Ass, where Oishi fights Ian and Anthony, a lot of the people really liked it. Its mix of anime-inspired animation with real-world background was definitely something admirable, especially for a shut-up cartoon. It clearly took them a lot of effort to make from that standpoint alone, but how did the show fare? Pretty well, in all honesty. The show stars Oishi Kawaii, a demon-slaying anime girl who gets transferred to a traditional American high school, along with her pet dog Noodles and her dad Ryuzu, and from here on, it's pure and utter chaos. I'll talk about specifics with the story a little bit, but for now, just know these main parts. As mentioned earlier, the animation is really well done, and it integrates itself surprisingly well into the real world. The first season tried a more hand-drawn style, which was expressive and charming, though limited. The second season uses a cleaner puppet-styled rig, which, while it wasn't as expressive as before, it was still rather impressive. The third season used the same puppet rig style, but also tries mixing the humans in live-action set pieces with the insanity of the animation, and I think that it works wonders. In a show like this, you'd expect there to be a lot of anime references thrown in with the show, but it mostly treats anime like a foreign mystical concept, like how Star vs. treats magic. Not to say that there aren't any anime references, but they're more outshone by the weird concepts that the show has. In fact, Oishi herself acts a lot like Star if she was aged up. Now I've done all this talking about the show overall without getting into the nitty gritty, so how about we get into it? But I'm separating it by season. You'll understand why in a bit. Season 1 was really good. It was incredibly funny, and did so very well, blending in the anime aesthetic with the real world. In this first season alone, I can recount so many good jokes and memories, from Oishi's ex-boyfriend Muka-san's playing Friday Night Funkin' against Rife, the arrogant captain of the football team, to the time where their substitute teacher punished kids for getting the right answer, from Ryuzu's meltdown when recollecting being fired from demon slaying, to detention. Just detention. Honestly, if there's any episode I revisit more than Krogzilla, and another show way in the future, it'd be detention.
No pets, take him home.
My apologies, Mr. Crawford, but you must understand, he is no mere pet.
No pets, take him home.
Dude, you're a dick, you know that?
No pets, take him home.
No pets, take him home.
Hey, stop copying me.
Hey, stop copying me.
No, you're doing the same thing.
But now, Season 2. While it has a lot of nice elements to it, the production value was raised and whatnot. The plot of this season was aggravating, so spoilers here I guess? Okay, so Noodle starts doing the do with one of these girls' pores, which makes her face explode and spawn babies. Then the babies go around and start doing the same. So Noodles and Oishi fight Banmi, one of the first children. It dies. Then the second half of the season has Oishi being pregnant with Muka-san's child. And after having the baby and not taking responsibility for his actions, Muka-san gets dumped by Oishi. This leads to Rafe trying to date Oishi by healing Banmi and making him... bane me. Ha 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 ha. Meanwhile, Muka-san tries to get back together with Oishi by taking her dad's advice and buying a Nicolas Cage fax machine, don't ask, and giving it to her, which she obviously rejects. Oishi fights all of Noodle's kin, and she saves the school by kissing Rafe and using the power of love, throwing more salt into Muka-san's wounds. It's disgusting, it's infuriating, and lacks the creativity brought by Season 1 except in short spurts. In fact, I'd say that it brings down the quality of the show overall, It also kinda cemented Oishi's dad as an awful character for me, as well as making me hate Muka-san's incredibly simpy behavior. Season 3 was a mix between both, as it had a lot of creativity of Season 1, mostly because the setting was changed to that of the high school being in space. I will say that I enjoyed quite a few of the episodes here, not as much as Season 1, but enough to have a general optimism. Then it turned into Hunger Games for the last few episodes, and I died a little inside. One thing that should be said about a lot of the Shut Up cartoons is that they do reference stuff around the time that they come out. You'll see a lot of Hunger Games references, or Obama references for example, and yes, I do die every time that I see them. Despite my general negativity towards it though, the plot resolves itself in an okay way, and while I may not be the best fan of it, it's alright, just not as good as the rest of Season 3, or 1. It definitely seems that this show was weird and inconsistent when it came to overarching plots, and it did a lot better with being episodic in all honesty. A little bit later, Oishi Origins was released, chronicling how Oishi got her start, and I'd say that it's a slight bit better than the series overall. Then again, it had like 3 episodes, and for the sake of ranking, I'm gonna put it with Oishi High School Battle. One thing that I didn't really like is that it didn't mash the live action and anime art styles together that much, and only shows the anime art style. In any case, while I might not be someone praising Oishi High School Battle as the best Shut Up cartoon ever, it's clear to say that it's super close to the top for me, thanks to the quality overall of the show, from the visuals to the writing. The only thing preventing me from a glowing recommendation is the lackluster second season, but that's basically it. It's still an excellent show that I recommend mostly. In any case, this show was Shut Up Cartoon's cash cow for a long time, to the point where it had the most views of any series overall. Out of every single Shut Up cartoon, it's also seen fondly and is recommended for what it does. So why isn't it on the actual channel anymore? Well, Oishi's popularity was noticed by DeFi Media, and it, along with a sequel series known as Oishi Demon Hunter, was going to be hosted on Go90. Oishi Demon Hunter was even fully made, as seen by IMDb listing all of its episodes, as well as general descriptions for all of them. But Go90 ceased operations, leading to neither shows to be advertised on the platform, and them basically just floating in limbo. Then with the crew members asked to post it back onto Shut Up Cartoons, DeFi's operations were shut down, leading to them being lost in limbo. Officially. Unofficially, you'll find all these episodes posted online, but it still sucks that this flagship series fell so low. The creators are still getting work today, as Daniel Dominguez got to write for SpongeBob SquarePants, The Captain Underpants Show, Crash and Bernstein, and Seis Manos. Joe Grecius also wrote for Crash and Bernstein, as well as Oishi Origins, ha 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 ha, and does the editing for several adult animated shows, like F is for Family, Brickleberry, and Mr. Pickles. With a few exceptions down the line, including Oishi High School Battle, viewer burnout was a massive problem, and it started immediately after the first 3 shows, but it steadily got worse as the time went on. While most of the pilots of these shows get over 500,000 views, the views exponentially decreased with most subsequent episodes. This was a time where it seemingly felt like Shut Up Cartoons was not going to have another success like Oishi or the first 3 ever again, and it also means that if something doesn't get positive reception, you know it's really bad.
Samurai!
Daycare!
Next up are the second Tuesday and Thursday blocks of Shut Up Cartoons, with the Thursday one being known as Samurai Daycare. It was seen generally positively by audiences. The plot is that a samurai-wielding weeb named Ted is working on the second floor of an Asian grocery store as a daycare teacher for kids. Alongside him is the store owner, Mr. Park, and his daughter, Jess, and calamity ensues. Compared to shows like Weasel Town or Snowjacked, this one uses its premise really well, and makes for a lot of nice episodes, but that may mostly be because of the characters. The characters in this show are incredibly well defined and funny. The show really utilizes Ted's romantic view of Asian culture in contrast with the down-to-earth nature of the parks. As an example, an episode I really like is episode 2, where Ted sees a drunk homeless guy and asks the homeless guy to teach him drunken style. Before someone tries to date Jess, Ted tests his honorable and strong nature through a series of trials. I mean, it doesn't hit all of the times, but when it does, it's pretty entertaining. The art style for the show was also fine. A lot of the characters have very noticeable designs and background elements that aren't that bad either. The setting that the show takes place in is interesting on a concept level, and we get to see small glimpses of it, but the daycare itself isn't that bad either. My only problem is that besides Ned, not a lot of them have faces that allow them to have expressions. The writing itself is pretty hit or miss though. There are a few jokes I remember, and some plot points are really well made, but other times, there's a lot of stuff that isn't the most interesting or funny thing to sit through. Oh yeah, and there's a lot of violence towards children. like a lot. But when it does good things, it's alright in all honesty. If you're interested, I'd say check it out. The show is made by Mike Bloom. He was originally a tech support person for Disney in the 90s and early 2000s, from The Hunchback of Notre Dame to Brother Bear, but he has had success in writing and creating other properties. After Samurai Daycare, his writing credibility skyrocketed by writing episodes of Fifi Cat Therapist and Super Slackers. On Tuesdays, there's the airing of Politicats, and judging from the fact that it has politic in its name, I'm not having high hopes for it, even though the show did get popular reception. The plot of the show is that it's President Black Cat against Mittens 2.0, stand-ins for Obama and basically any Republican, in the latest political season. However, there are many things in the way of Black Cat, as the Fancy Feast Council is controlling Mittens 2.0 from behind the scenes, and sends as many opponents as they can to fend off Black Cat. Calamity ensues. Now, one problem that could easily come with this is having political jokes and themes based on things that are really relevant at the time that become anachronistic after a while, similarly to something like Our Cartoon President or Little Bush or Amerikids. But to my knowledge, they don't really do that much in terms of the story. I mean, sometimes they cover issues, but it's not anything too distracting. What is distracting is basically everything else. This show is so incredibly incoherent that it's hard to watch. Plot points seemingly drop from anywhere and everywhere, and it feels like too much at times. By this, I mean a dimension warping dog shows up at the last minute and goes to different dimensions, and that's the ending of the entire series. But there is one thing consistent about the show, the animation. Remember earlier when I said that Snowjacked was stiff cardboard that didn't move well? Politicats has somewhat similar problems, but a bit better. Sure, the animation between any of the characters is extremely static, and their facial expressions don't change except for their eyes. But the fact that they're cats makes this more appealing compared to that of Snowjacked or Weasel Town, and I think that might be the saving grace for me. But let's get back on topic. While I praise the fact that it doesn't really talk about politics at all, it leads to a problem of asking why Obama is the main character. Like, I get that he is the running president at the time, but it still doesn't make much sense other than that. Then again, the show's biggest factor is its weirdness. This show is weird. Like I said before, plot points can drop and be too much at times, and I think a prime example of this is having Michelle Obama Cat fighting a bunch of cat ninjas. The only downside to this form of weirdness is that they don't really do anything other than say, wow, this is random. At times it feels like explaining politics to an alien and not much else. I mean, if you think you'd like it, I won't stop you from giving it a try. I at least liked it more than something like Weasel Town or Snowjacked. But in my opinion, all that it has to offer is its confusing nature. Oh yeah, and that dubstep theme song that makes me want to throw a cat. This show is made by Sunny Boy, a collaboration between Hidiji and Craig S. Phillips, within Sunny Boy Productions. They're doing well, as Sunny Boy released projects like Kingston and the Magicians Lost and Found, and Yeti and Spaghetti. Time for the third Monday, Wednesday, and Friday block, starting with Planets on Mondays. It had generally positive reception. The concept of this show is that planets of the solar system live together, and wacky hijinks ensue. Out of most of the shows in this whole retrospective, I think that this one is probably the smartest in terms of writing. As in, it doesn't go for humor that's too random, which considering the last show that I covered seems like a bit of a blessing. It doesn't feel like other shut-up cartoons where the pacing can be too fast, too slow, or all over the place, as the short time span given for the episodes here really work well with the writing given. Speaking of the writing, let's talk about our cast. The son is named Soul. He's a star, a rather famous one, and he's gay. Pubertina is probably the best we'll get with gay stuff representation-wise, so he's fine compared to other shows. Mercury is a womanizing sleazeball. Venus is named Venus, and he's a foreign planet that, while weird, has a good moral compass and a sense of caring for Earth. Speaking of, Baby Earth is the baby of the group, and has a pet Moon. Mars is a general downer of the group, though sometimes him and Mercury mesh due to how similar they look and act. Jupiter is a big gentle gas giant who's insecure more often than not. Saturn is named Saturn, and is the only woman of the group. So yeah. Uranus is a smart yet strict planet who plays things by the rules a lot of the time. Neptune is the elder of the group, and Pluto is a dog. While they aren't really fleshed out, the characters have really good dynamics and work off each other very well, to the point where even the weakest planets have some strong moments. Speaking of that, there's the fact that the show has a special charm to it. A lot of it comes from the science aspect of the show, and how it brings in a lot of scientific stuff to the episodes. Jupiter's red spot becomes a source of anxiety for him, Halley's Comet appears as a date, and a black black hole becomes a predator for the Earth. It also has a nice art style by having 3D objects orbit in order to have 2D lip syncing. It's a generally appealing show to watch if you're bored, because it pulls out the style that it wants to go for surprisingly well. Sure, the later episodes get kinda not smart. For example, there's Earth's parents and Earth having an evil clone, but they still hold up pretty well, and there wasn't a necessarily sharp decline like Oishi High School Battle. Plus, the show is really tied together by its character interactions anyway, so it's not bad. I do feel like Earth gets a lot of the screen time though. But yeah, everything about this show is really good, and as of now, it's beaten Krogzilla for the top. The director or creator of the show was Matt Clark, who isn't credited for anything other than Planets, which is unfortunate. I also can't really find any of the work that he did, like how I did with Do's and Don'ts.
Embarrassing, freaking embarrassing, really embarrassing. Oh, word.
As I mentioned earlier, most shut-up cartoons have a fanbase of their own that they met along the way, leading to a show getting positive reception. Even shows they disliked, like Politicats or even Weasel Town, have had this fanbase in one form or another. But on top of that, there are mainly 2 shows that have gotten heavy negative feedback, to the point of no return. First with Pubertina, which was just alright in comparison to the slightly better Do's and Don'ts and Zombies vs. Ninjas, and the next one was really freaking embarrassing. In fact, its first trailer was hated harder than Pubertina was, and so was the rest of the show, to the point where it became the most hated shut-up cartoon. So there's gotta be something awful here, right? Well, yeah, but this failure is more interesting compared to either Snowjacked or Weasel Town. First off, if you couldn't tell, Wednesdays are a cursed block for shut-up cartoons, with Pubertina, Weasel Town, and now this show, which cemented that curse of not having any genuinely fully positive shows. But anyways, this show was made by Peter Hanan, the writer and producer of Cat Dog. Yes, I'm not kidding. And it gets weirder. The show involves Peter Hanan walking up to people on the streets of LA and asking them about embarrassing stories, in a man-in-the-street sort of way. For some people who are too embarrassed to tell their stories, Peter got the voices of several of his other friends around LA, including Tom Kenny. Yes, that Tom Kenny. So yeah, an experienced creator of an animated property has other professional friends help to make a show. Knowing that alone would heighten your expectations exponentially, and as for the man on the street vibe, by itself that would be fine. But then we get to the actual animation. The animation behind this show is the worst in shut-up cartoons. Worse than Weasel Town, worse than Snowjacked, hell, even worse than Mike and Melissa. The illustrations of the characters are gross and incredibly unappealing. They look like Ringo Starr art MS Paintings. The animation behind them isn't much better though. They take the cardboard problem of Snowjacked and even Politicats to a degree, and decide to make the frames look like they actually snapshotted cardboard. The visual effects include everything and anything gross you can imagine. Warts and boils, fart clouds and shit stains, and rashes galore. Saying it's hard to look at is a damn understatement. But you know what? You could probably close your eyes and listen to these stories, if those were the only problems. But now we get to the audio effects, which include the same types of gross annoying sounds that you'd expect given the visual effects. But even then, they have a bunch of annoying noise in the background of some shorts. It's terrible. Credit where it's due, I like some of the stories that they tell, and the concept isn't the worst thing to try and animate per se. In fact, sometimes the stories are told with minimal sound effects or gross visuals, and that's pretty nice to see. But the rest of the episodes have such obvious problems that they drag the entire show to a new layer of hell each time. I'm sorry to say this, but the show is still more enjoyable than Weasel Town despite being worse to sit through. At least it wasn't boring. Peter Hanan, after the show, did work on the children's show Let's Go Luna. Oishi Origins played as the Friday block, and replacing Samurai Daycare's Thursday schedule was this show, Icons of Teens. We'll cover the show that replaced Oishi Origins after this one. Icons of Teen is a show that, while it didn't have as bad of a reputation as Pubertina or really freaking embarrassing, it had a slightly worse one than that of Weasel Town. And to be fair, even though it got its fanbase eventually, the general consensus was saying that the show was bad. But call me crazy, cause I actually kinda liked it. Granted, there are a few problems that show up here and there, but I had a good time with it overall. It didn't start out well though. Like, I need to stress that 1 minute in, and I was hating what I was watching, and I wanted to turn it off immediately, but I grit my teeth and watched through it, and it kinda grew on me. So, what's the concept? Well, a bunch of famous icons, from Master Chief to Spock to Oprah, are given a silly backstory to some aspect of their lives, which are completely random and over the top. At first, it kinda had the same problem as Politicats, where it was random and nonsensical for the sake of it, but after watching a few episodes, the randomness of the episodes tie together in the end and make it feel like, you know, the episodes weren't necessarily a waste of time. That's not to say as if the writing writing is perfect. I mean, it has around as many hits as it does misses, but it wasn't too bad. Then there's the animation. A lot of people hate it, and honestly, I'm kinda mixed. For the people in the show, it essentially rotoscopes certain frames of animation for them, and then has those move from one frame to another to simulate motion, except for things like dragging assets or eye and mouth movements. It's definitely interesting from that point of view, and nicer to look at compared to Snowjacked, but other than that, it's not really the best looking out there. But despite how iffy the animation itself looks, the storytelling alone raises the show a bit higher than the worst in this retrospective. It's weird for sure, but it does better than Snowjacked and Politicats by a mile, and I could see its worth. This show is made by Brian Weisel, a name you'll see a few times in this retrospective. He story edited for Rick and Morty, wrote for the Ant-Man TV series, Robot Chicken, and Future Worm, and created Hot Streets. Also, there's nowhere to mention this, but a series that was gonna replace Icons of Teen was called Comical Spill. The only evidence of it existing was in the Shut Up Cartoons trailer, and it was made by Angela Salt. Hard to say the quality from the trailer alone, but it's unfortunate that it got lost to time. Coming in after Oishi Origins is Teleporting Fat Guy, the first show on this retrospective to actually be made by Ian and Anthony. This show is based off of a video that Smosh did about a titular character. It had a song and everything. And while this show did have positive reception overall, more than a few people were upset that the song used in the video wasn't used for the series. Nor did the original person from the video playing the teleporting fat guy reprise his role. Still, let's get into it. The story is about Robbie Lee Phillips Jr., a fat, unpopular high schooler who gets a magical teleporting glove. This discovery upsets Bart Reynolds, a man who's been after the glove for a while, and, as incentive, kidnaps Robbie's crush. Within this journey, he has Oliver, a robotic honey badger, and his dad who gets turned into ashes by Bart in the first episode. Now, this show is more story-driven than other cartoons, similar to something like Oishi's later seasons or Politicats, so I won't reveal much more than the synopsis of the plot I just said. For now, I'll say that the overarching story is actually handled surprisingly well throughout the show. Plot twists and plot turns are surprisingly well executed, and it pays off well too. But I won't be talking about that because it spoils more of the concept. I can't say much about the actual plot though. While it actually explains stuff and ties up more than a few plot points, so it's not really like Politicats, that's all I can say, cause plot points do indeed come from nowhere, and while everything worked out well for the first season, the next few were relatively garbage for the show in particular. You want an example? The Mario Bros and Princess Peach appear as plot points without being named the way they are. But enough about the show's plot and whatnot. What does it actually feel like to watch the show? Well, long story short, it's basically like watching a Smosh video. It has weird stuff in it, but throughout the episode it stays consistent. There are a few gaming and cultural references here and there too. If you like Ian and Anthony Smosh or even tolerate them, then this show is riding up your alley. Even if you're just a fan of stupid humor, this show does its part in making it enjoyable to watch. My recommendation? I'd say give it a watch. It's definitely top 5 material for me. As for Ian and Anthony, well, they're Ian and Anthony. They did Smosh for a while and then Anthony left.
Yes, I know, and thank you.
For the next Tuesday block, replacing Politicats, is Sub 3. This show also got a surprising amount of hate, similarly to Icons of Teen, but worse than that is the fact that it got really low viewership compared to other shows, with only 100,000 watching the first episode. I find it a shame though, since I don't think that it's that bad. Granted, there are a few problems with the show, but I actually enjoyed sitting through it. The plot of the show is that Sub 3 works at a pizza place, and he delivers pizza in 3 minutes or less, but something wacky always gets in his way. It's built like a Speed Racer parody in a lot of aspects, both good and bad. Character designs look like they can fit right into Speed Racer, and honestly, they don't look too bad. The voice acting is probably where most people started disliking it. From an objective standpoint, the voice acting is not good at all. Inflections are non-existent with these characters, and neither is tone.
Huh? Cool! One piping hot pie! On one side there is bacon, while on the other side there's sausage with many olives scattered in between. Yes, coming right up, and piping hot too.
But on the other hand, it's definitely trying to pay homage to the original Speed Racer dub, which was known for having similar problems.
He's going over that cliff.
It's intentionally trying to reflect this aspect of the show, and it really shows. Though Sub 3 himself and a lot of the other characters feel like they actually can't talk louder or they'll ruin their voices, except for Obermeyer, who really does a good job. The animation isn't very good. A lot of the times backgrounds and other elements feel like they're dragged and dropped from an old Newgrounds cartoon, and the characters barely move to the point where they feel like statues. I also get that this is trying to replicate the limited animation of Speed Racer, but this part is not done too well, and it feels lazy unintentionally rather than being lazy intentionally. The writing of this show is as zany and wacky as you can expect a Speed Racer parody to be, and I found that a lot of the scenarios were really funny to explore. So yeah, overall, I did enjoy this one quite a bit, and compared to most of the shut-up cartoons, I'd say that this is above average. The creator of the show is Prudence Fenton, who is an animation producer for Pee-wee's Playhouse, Liquid Television, and Kronk's New Groove. Now, the last show of this first season of Shut Up Cartoons is With Zombies. Unlike all other Wednesday shows before it, this one actually has a majority positive reception among general audiences, a trend that fortunately continued onward with the rest of the Wednesday shows. The concept of this show is that the zombie apocalypse is happening, it happened. And now that it's over, the Martin family is trying to go back to normal, as the only family not infected by the virus. The family consists of Jeff Martin, the father of the family who hates everything zombie related, Karen Martin, the mother of the family who's incredibly focused and determined when it comes to anything, especially being a mom, Carly Martin, the goth girl who really wants nothing to do with the rest of the family, and Simon Martin, the nerdy kid who's a bit different from the rest. The dynamic alone makes it feel a lot like these characters were ripped from American Dad, especially with their personalities. But the zombie apocalypse does a good job at keeping it fresh, or at least not a total ripoff of American Dad. In fact, I'll say that this concept is incredible from a storytelling standpoint. The show has an unfortunate set of problems with the fact that the episodes are a bit too short, and the pacing feels like a zombie tried writing it. So the combo of short episodes and the slow pacing make it feel like nothing really happens in the story. And, to be fair, on an episode-to-episode basis, that's kinda true. Not to say that all the episodes are boring. In fact, they explore the concept of a zombie society really well, and the dilemmas that the characters have make for good plots, but it's kinda slow. Then again, this was originally made as a full pilot, but then it got split into different parts. So it's excusable since they did a good job splitting them up. So yeah, it doesn't seem like I have much to say about this show, except there's one thing that I was surprised by, and that's the overarching plot thread. This show has two of its characters go through such well-developed change that I really like it. Spoilers here. So it turns out that Simon was turned into a zombie by a zombie squirrel before Jeff locked everyone out of the house. He's been trying to hide the fact that he's a zombie from everyone, and was incredibly nervous about doing so, especially to his dad being anti-zombie. Speaking of, Jeff keeps on getting hallucinations of his dad telling him expectations to follow, and rules about what a real man should do, making him do things to the zombies who he doesn't truly understand. Once Simon actually reveals that he's a zombie to Jeff, Jeff freaks out as his hallucinations tell him to kill his son, but instead he shoots away his hallucinations, and decides to choose Simon as his son rather than treat him as something else for something that he can't control. And the spoilers here. It's a nice touch in terms of continuity, and I like how it rewards the viewer for sitting through a lot of the episodes. It's also nice to see that the characters have actually developed through one of these shows. The only other one that this has happened to is maybe Teleporting Fat Guy, but they did it better for this show. Because of this, I like With Zombies, and I think that it's an above average series. In fact, out of all the shows in this retrospective, I kinda wanted a continuation to this show over most others, even ones I liked better, like Oishi or Krogzilla. This show is made by Matt Clark, the Planets guy. With this, Season 1 of these shows is over, and Season 2 starts. Around this time, shows like the original 3 got their second seasons, though they seemed relatively mismatched from one another in terms of when they aired. By that I mean Do's and Don'ts Season 2 aired February 4th, 2013, and Pubertina Season 2 aired February 20th, 2013. There's also a lot of high highs and low lows in terms of both quality and popularity. To be fair, some of it was warranted, as trailers for these shows haven't been seen for more than a few of them. There's also less and less information about these shows overall. The next Wednesday cartoon, which is weird since we just covered one, but whatever, was Paper Cuts, a show that was relatively popular with general audiences. It also aired every other Wednesday as opposed to every Wednesday. What's the concept? Okay, take a movie trailer and remake it while changing the visuals to paper. That's it. That's literally it. You can tell that effort definitely went into the show. I mean, animating with paper is relatively challenging. It's still just movie trailers though. Not to mention that unlike something like Icons of Teen, it doesn't differentiate itself from the source material in any way, that being besides the voices which were redubbed over. I mean, give honest trailers credit. They at least take the material they're given and change it up a little. Do I hate the show? Well, no, but it was pretty boring to watch. I'll still consider it above Weasel Town because movie trailers feel like they have better writing than it, but it's not a good watch otherwise, keeping it pretty low on the list. The show was made by Travis Betts, who did a bunch of shorts. Moving on. Now, this one's a weird one. Liza Zoo isn't technically a shut-up cartoon, but it technically is at the same time. What do I mean by this? Well, this was originally a Canadian stop-motion series that aired on Teletoon in 2008. It was acquired by DeFi Media, and they decided to post the episodes on the Shut Up Cartoons channel. It also aired on Sundays, so I guess that's something. In any case, this show also got a lot of popularity from fans, especially because it lasted longer than the 3 to 4 minutes of other Shut Up cartoons, and instead had a 22-minute run for each of its 20 episodes. It's basically like saying that something like Pokemon was a Cartoon Network show, since they had the rights to it and aired it, though now it isn't being aired anymore as the rights were released. Similarly to what happened in this show, and how it was also erased from the channel. So, what's the concept? Well, 7 animals are given a big mansion, and have to do certain challenges each week to avoid being eliminated from said mansion. It's made to be a direct parody of Big Brother. In some ways, it has the adult humor and same basic concept as something like Drawn Together, but it has silly humor and moments that make it feel more like total drama. As a mix of the two shows, I think it does a pretty good job. One thing that's noticeable about the animation is the fact that it's stop motion, similarly to something like Zombies vs Ninjas, but with more fluidity and less focused on making action high-paced. It's a strength of the show, as it gives all the characters and settings unique looks, and since the show is dialogue heavy, it helps with emotions. That being said, I can see people being turned off by the designs, as they are somewhat ugly, but it's not too off-putting, as it fits the world that this show takes place in. Speaking of the characters, there's Ray the Orangutan, a loudmouth party dude, Jake, a scheming manipulative pig who lives in a sad, lonely, depressing life as the guy who lives in his mother's basement, Moresky, an old drunken Russian bear, Dr. D, a rapping penguin with a lot of attitude, Rico, a gay Latino crocodile, yep, Minot, a panther model who's basically the Heather of this show, and Chi-Chi, an overweight panda who's good-hearted yet ignored. A lot of these characters are stereotypes, and very noticeably so, and not all of them hit gold, but again, comparing it to Total Drama, it takes these characters and puts them into different scenarios, making them entertaining to watch through. The plots are very wacky and engaging, from them finding their room keys, or them being taken over by a kids channel block, or a truth-telling segment. My favorite one is the ending of the first season, where they discover the script room and mess around with the show using said scripts. I'd say that the only problems with this show in terms of shut-up cartoons is that the length of the show makes it hard to binge, and the music videos that they sometimes have in between unfortunately don't help. But it's still a generally well-made show. Well, considering that it was made for TV, that should make sense. I guess what I should talk about is how I judge this show. If we're judging it as a TV show, it's fine. Not groundbreaking, but fine. But compared to the rest of the shut-up cartoons, most of the show's overall quality raises it to somewhere near the top. This show was made by Adam Shashin, a person who did a bunch of other stop-motion stuff, like Glenn Martin DDS and Miser Brothers Christmas.
Shut up.
Just shut up!
Now here's a bit of a weird one. Just Shut Up is a live-action mock kids show that occasionally aired old Shut Up cartoons as segments of its show. But should this count? I'd say it does, not only because it did air on the channel, but it does maintain a more animated nature to its writing. In any case, this show had mixed reception, and we'll get into why that is in a bit. The concept of this show is one where the hosts, Andy, Miss Wendy, and Mr. Squirrel, do episodes with kids learning a lesson, but instead it's made to be as perverse as possible, every Saturday. From the description alone, it sounds so much like Do's and Don'ts, to the point where real kids is a selling point, but I do think that this show does it a bit better. For starters, the three hosts make a more interesting dynamic compared to something like the narrator in Do's and Don'ts, especially with Andy being the sensible one, and Mr. Squirrel making it as bad as possible. In fact, these personalities add a lot to the jokes. The fact that real kids partake in this show also makes it better in terms of comedy than Do's and Don'ts, just for the fact that they also act like real kids. They don't feel like kids reading a script, they just feel like kids being kids. The writing for this show is also relatively good. Live action has always been Smosh's forte, and they did an excellent job with the skits that these hosts get into. A memorable one for me is the one about religion where Mr. Squirrel imitates God. They also invite guests onto the show to give them an interview, and these segments can also be pretty nice. So, this show seems awesome, right? Well, yeah, but there is one element that's incredibly hit or miss with the entirety of the show, and those are the tune segments. You see, twice in each episode, there will be a segment where they air part of a previous shut-up cartoon, and the mixed receptions for these shows stem a lot from this. Not only does quality vary depending on which cartoon plays, but it's not very bingeable if memories of these cartoons are still fresh in your head. Other than that though, if you like Smosh, I'd say check them out. Speaking of, this is technically the second show made by Ian and Anthony. Oh boy, here we go. By far, the most popular shut-up cartoon out of all of them, to this day, is Smosh Babies. Originally airing on Mondays, weirdly enough. Not only did it have an incredibly positive reception, but a lot of the episodes from the beginning of the show to the end of the show have view counts in the millions. The final episode aired 9 days after Anthony left the channel, and as soon as it was released, the entire channel shut down. It was truly the show that stole the mantle of popularity from something like Oishi High School Battle. It's also the longest lasting show out of all of them, with 5 seasons and 56 episodes, and it even did a collaboration with YouTube for their Geek Week video. So yeah, despite the fact that there were several shows that I liked that the general audiences didn't, and vice versa, I had high hopes for this one, and did it deliver? Not really. The concept of this one is that it's the Smosh crew sent to daycare, meeting wacky characters and wacky obstacles to overcome through the lens of babies. From this alone, it feels like they were trying to do something like how Rugrats does things, or heck, even something like Baby Looney Tunes, but with an internet edge to them. But with how the writing is, it's more like Total Dramarama or Boss Baby. In fact, that's probably the biggest problem of the show. The writing is not good. I almost quit entirely because Anthony said a Hunger Games line in the first episode, and it made me so damn tired of all of this. There are so many instances where what the babies know about adult stuff and kid stuff gets blurred, and it gets to be pretty annoying when they're afraid to go somewhere in one episode and then roam the city in another, or that they sustain injuries where bones pop out or Ian gets his head eaten off and everything's still fine. Heck, it gets more confusing with the actual world the show takes place in, where the line between fantasy and reality might as well be drawn with chalk, and that might be the only noticeable thing I could say about the writing, because it borders between meh and awful. Well, let me correct that a little bit. In the first 2.5 seasons, it lowered on subpar and meh. There are either plots that were tame enough for babies to watch, or as adult, as the middle school audience that Smosh is aimed for. A lot of these episodes are either really predictable or really boring. Examples of these plot points include being potty trained or learning to swim. They weren't awful per se, but they were far from good and so standard. Then seasonal rot hit the show hard, and instead of doing regular baby stuff with a slight adult edge, the show just became a confusing mess. While it sometimes had the baby stuff, other times it was about Frankensteining 2 babies together, or finding evil clones of Ian and Anthony, or going to the future. As in, not a dream sequence, they actually go to the future, and sometimes they don't really end. They just end on a joke or something and call it an episode. They literally have one episode where Dan and Phil from Dan and Phil Gaming go into the daycare, steal cookies, and Anthony and Ian get blamed for it, and that's literally it. At its best, the writing of the show makes you want to scream "Who cares?" into a void, and at its worst, it makes you want to slam my head into a wall to get less wasteful than this show. So yeah, the writing is definitely worse than Snowjacked, but that's enough about the writing. I do have a bit of a problem with the animation. While it doesn't look that bad from a drawing standpoint, the animation of the characters is way too expressive for the dialogue. There are times where the characters are stabbed by baby binkies or hit by dodgeballs to the point where it looks like they're dying, and the lip syncing makes the characters look like they speak gibberish more than they speak words. Their mouths move way too much. So yeah, I didn't like the writing or the animation that much. Is there any reason I'm stalling out this segment? Yes, because there is one thing I liked. While the writing is worse than hot garbage, the delivery and personality of these characters make it way more enjoyable than the worst shut-up cartoons. Hector is a crazy Mexican baby, as well as a baby that's basically stoned all the time. Sing is the needed straight man of the group, and combined their insanity is so enjoyable to listen to. And while Ian and Anthony aren't as entertaining as them, they also get their moments to shine in terms of delivery. They also have some side characters, including a bully gang and a snooty popular girl, and they both have some good moments. Joe and Luke from Barats and Beretta, and also Smosh, play two sadistically weird teachers in the 4th season, and they also have some really funny lines. Finally, there are the guest appearances. There's definitely too many to count, and not all of them are good, but some of them are. Mari from Smosh Games does a really funny job as an evil psychotic baby version of herself. And my favorite is Baby Tyler Oakley, a gay baby interested in Ian. A funny moment I remember was when Tyler wanted to kiss Ian, and they thought that kissing was just touching butts together. I actually chuckled at that, and that's more than I could say than some of the worst cartoons of this retrospective so far. But overall, the show still wasn't good, and it would have been top 3 bad if the characters weren't so entertaining.
You wouldn't like it if it happened to you.
The show after Paper Cuts was finished was Munroe, another Brian Weisel cartoon, and one that had a lot of surprisingly positive reception, though not a lot of people really watched it. And on that front, I don't have much to add. I really like this show. The plot is that the titular Munroe works for a government agency and tries to take down a terrorist organization known as the Group of Evil, through different spy and sci-fi scenarios. Along the way, there's the Colonel, briefing Munroe with his missions, RPG, a disguise expert, and Suicide Watch, the man who takes care of Munroe's gadgets. And this show has a lot of twists and turns, so I really can't say much more than that. In any case, there's a lot to like about this one. First off, it's definitely weird. I mean, one of the people on the team is a pig, but unlike Icons of Teen, the concept of the show is very locked in. What I mean is that you can expect the baseline stuff from the show, rather than the complete randomness of Icons of Teen. So it's randomness with constraints basically, and it's not a bad watch. Second off, it's funny. Like, really funny. Even watching the first episode, I laughed a surprising amount of times. I will say that some of it comes ironically, like how I felt with Pubertina, but they also plan out some jokes really well and it works. Like, there's 3 jokes about the call function and vibrate function on a wrist communicator in the first episode, and all of them were different and equally funny.
They're incompetent fools!
Stupid jerks.
Outrageous! I'm calling my lawyer. Whoops.
I would go so far as to say that if you don't care about the quality overall, watch Munroe for its humor. Another thing I liked about the show is that it had a relatively good pacing, to the point where I was, dare I say, engaged watching it with normal speed. It doesn't feel like any of the jokes or plot points stay their welcome too long, nor do they go too quickly. They show up for just the right amount of time on average. The only downsides I can really say about the show is the animation, which is better than Icons of Teen, but only by a bit. Along with that, the show definitely deserved a proper ending instead of the cliffhanger we got. But besides that, I will say that this show is really good, to the point where I don't even want to spoil anything for those who haven't seen it, or even those who have, because no matter what you remember about the show, it's definitely worth a rewatch if you can ignore the animation. It's funny and well paced sometimes, and that's all you really need for a comedic internet series. Otaku Taco Truck was the next show to show up on Mondays, and it had a relatively positive reception, as far as a lot of these modern shut-up cartoons have had so far. Not to mention, it did have an okay viewer base, though that may be because of the thumbnail in the first episode. But what do I think? It's got a few good qualities, but more bad than good. The concept of the show is that a taco enthusiast, Swiss, a taco cook, Koala, and a siren named Mari run a food truck called the Soul Food Truck. While operating it, Mari's pet Chi-Chi gets kidnapped, and the series is about going through circumstance after circumstance to get Chi-Chi back from Mama So, and to protect the culture of tacos from being ruined, or something like that, I guess. The show was made by Sunny Boys, similarly to Politicats, and on their website, they actually had a Tumblr, up to episode 5, showing progress on certain elements of the show, especially with how detailed and dynamic the actual characters look, compared to the actual show. While the designs of the characters aren't as good as the concept art, in fact it gets downgraded a lot in terms of detail, they actually don't look too bad, at least in stills, because this animation is ugly. It's a mix between Politicats and a 3-lane video, with its stilted cardboard animation and its weird movement of the characters' faces. Speaking of the characters, I like the dynamic of the main two. Not to really reveal any spoilers, but their connection to one another, through their love of tacos and skill in making them, is pretty endearing, especially when you learn more about them. It gets a bit interesting. And by themselves, they're alright too. But then there's Mari. As a character, she's basically used for bait a lot of the time, and other than that, she does help the crew out in certain instances, but listening to her voice felt like my reality was getting distorted. It sounds like a blend of Starfire and Celestia Ludenberg, and it doesn't sound that good at all.
Probably just needs a little fire. Fire pets are all the rage.
In regards to voice direction, there are definitely times where people talk over one another, or they just talk super slow. So unfortunately, I have to say that it was subpar overall. Finally, the writing. It's alright. I wouldn't holler or hoot over the writing overall, but I will admit that I chuckled a few times. And they do have a plot that progresses steadily. I also like the new tacos that they come up with in a lot of the episodes. Other than that, the writing does have some goofy charm to it that a regular Smosh viewer would probably enjoy. Overall, I have to say that this one had a bit more bad than good, and even the good that was present wasn't spectacular. It kinda has the same problem as really freaking embarrassing, where the bad stuff overshadows any good stuff, but it's definitely not as bad as really freaking embarrassing. Still, it's a shame. The next Monday show was Alfred and Poe, the first actual 3D show on the network, besides Zombies vs. Ninjas and Life's a Zoo, which is more stop motion. Out of most of the recent shows, besides Smosh Babies, this one had a bigger viewer base, making almost 750,000 watchers with its first episode. It also got a lot of positive feedback. As for me, I like it alright, but we gotta get into it first. This Australian-based show stars an odd couple with a chill, messy turtle named Poe and a strict, clean toucan named Alfred, and that's basically it. They just do stuff around their house and have a chill time, and honestly, they don't do it too bad. Along the way, they meet some colorful characters, like a talking toaster, a talking trash can, and a genius of the lamp. The animation of this show is very limited in terms of background, design, and set pieces, and while it is upsetting, it's clear that this being a 3D show meant that quite a bit of effort was put into the show in animation, more so than 2D shows. For example, things like lip syncing that are easier in 2D take longer with 3D, assuming that the characters have normal mouths, which, with the exception of the Garbage Can and Alfred, holds true. It's why a lot of TV cartoons, for instance, are done in 2D as opposed to 3D. Speaking of lip syncing, the voice acting of the show is really good. In fact, I say that they're phenomenal in terms of voice delivery and direction. Like, no matter what the writing calls for, they all do a really great job. As an example, Alfred and Poe's personalities are openly expressed, and easily noticeable thanks to the direction that they have for the voices. I also think that the characters themselves are the main draw of the show, since the set pieces don't really have much detail to them, as they're each entertaining in their own ways. None of them overstay their welcome, and they also have pretty good chemistry with one another, so if these interest you, then have a watch, because other than that, the scripts can be so boring sometimes. I would say that the characters themselves are the only draw to the show, since they try to make each and every script given into something interesting. But other than that, jeez, they get boring. My least favorite one is episode 4, where all Poe does is describe how bad his farts are. It's funny on a character interaction level, but nothing else. And that can apply to a lot of the show. I wouldn't say it's worse than Smosh Babies, despite having similar problems, because the worst parts of the show are like C- level. In any case, Alfred and Poe was a show that existed, and was okay. As for the creator, the show was made and animated by Chris Bennett, who also voiced Alfred. In fact, his Twitter handle is still Alfred and Poe after all these years, and even his website for his personal work is alfredandpoe.com. He's expressed that this show was something monumental for him in terms of making creative work. Not only did he do work for Smosh, including the Smosh movie, but he also worked currently as an animator and writer for Bluey, and the creator of a kids book named Robot and Dinosaurs. I may have not liked this show too much, but I will say that I'm glad that he found this as an inspiration, and that he's proud of his work, or that he even appreciates it as much as he does.
Are you coming out right now as transgender? Cause if so, I'm a little bit freaked out, but I'm gonna try to be supportive.
The next Monday show, I hope you're noticing a theme of shows coming out on Mondays, is Money and Cash. This is around the point where the decline of the popularity of shut-up cartoons became super noticeable. Like, aside from Smosh Babies and Alfred and Poe, a lot of the new shut-up cartoons, and even continuations of the older ones, ended up being less and less viewed, and less people watched what it had to offer, and even fewer people were able to document anything going on. As an example, here's a wiki page on the Smosh wiki for do's and don'ts, and here's one for Otaku Taco Truck, and here's the one for Money and Cash. I'll get a bit into it in the final break of this marathon, but for now, we have Money and Cash. The plot of the show is that a nickel and a dollar bill hang out, and that's it. It's like Alfred and Poe, ha ha ha. But the writing has references to a bunch of other types of money and currency related things, like planets. Is it as good as either of those shows? Similarly to Planets, it looks like the animation involves taking items we know and adding facial movement to them, and it doesn't do it as well as Planets. You see, not only is the animation smoother for the mouth movements of Planets compared to Money and Cash, but they all involve different planets with different colors and different looks when they rotate. With Money and Cash, since all the objects are just coins and dollars, they don't look as interesting. Plus, the only things changing are the mouths, eyes, and their shape, compared to Planets which just had their faces tilt and move. The writing of the show definitely tries to utilize its concept as well as it can, and I'll give credit that I could see some of the episodes working, like when Dollar has stuff written on his face, or the differences between change and dollars in society, in terms of a half-baked race allegory, but I didn't really find a lot of it interesting or well done per se. Was it boring? Sorta, but not ungodly so. I definitely had a chuckle a few times, but other than the chuckle, the only other notes that I have for the show are boring. Is there anything I liked about it? Yeah. That being that the voice acting of Dollar definitely makes him different compared to that of anyone else on even the worst shut-up cartoons. But other than that, the show was average and nothing more. In any case, the person who made Money and Cash was Joel H. Cohen, who doesn't have himself credited for this one anywhere else. The only Joel H. Cohens I could find online was one where he was a Simpsons writer, which is more probable, or one as a comedic film writer for the Garfield movies and Cheaper by the Dozen. It kinda goes to show how little worth being in a shut-up cartoon was for him. So, shut-up cartoons wasn't working so well. The original content that used to fill up the channel started becoming less and less frequent and less organized. A majority of the popularity of the channel came from old shows getting new seasons, with the one exception being Smosh Babies. Then again, Smosh is the main focus of the channel, so it makes sense. The last few shows that come from the channel are weird ones for sure. You see, a good few of them weren't even made for the purpose of shut-up cartoons, but instead were made for other channels and programs, and DeFi Media just got them and put them onto the channel. Even more of them were meant to advertise other channels or animation studios. I guess to put it another way, it's sorta like how Machinima is working with Lowbrow to make a bunch of animated shorts and series, and now, since Machinima tanked, now Lowbrow is working for itself. A good few of them were really good, but viewership mostly tanked overall. Okay, we're at the final stretch. On every other Fridays, Uberdude aired, a show that had the same viewership as something like Munroe or Money and Cash, with the same amount of general positive reception. The concept of the show is that superheroes are everywhere and Uberdude is making his way through the world of heroism by trying to make a name for himself. With Peacemaker, an increasingly violent and narcissistic version of Batman, It Girl, with the power to turn into whatever someone desires, and 5D, a sentient ball that has 5-dimensional computer properties. One thing that I like about the show is that they diversify between treating heroes like heroes and treating them like celebrities, similarly to how My Hero Academia touches on the topic, but with, say it with me now, an adult edge. I will say that the writing is very entertaining. It gets gross sometimes, but other than that, the show is very well written, and very funny when it needs to be. It's not the funniest show I've seen, but I was engaged by plots about taking down a teen pop star that gets bigger with his fanbase's size, and similar episodes to that. Speaking of the writing, each episode actually has a choose your own adventure in the middle. You can choose 2 options at the end of each episode, and they lead to different events happening, though they still lead to the same outcome in the end. Honestly, it's really inventive and creative, and I like it. Even without that gimmick, the ideas that the show has as a world overrun with heroes works well. Being a celebrity allegory in terms of superheroes building themselves from the bottom and turning into a crime-fighting series is very neat, especially with the titular character, Uberdude. The fact that they displaced the sleazy and corrupt world with this naive and innocent farm town boy is a smart move, and I think Uberdude's naivete with his personality helps bring up the show so much, especially when he doesn't react to things like you'd expect him to. My favorite example is when a psychotic stalker boils his bunny, and Uberdude just can't wait to eat it. Unfortunately though, that's all she wrote. In areas like animation, animation or voice acting, the show's fine, but that's it. I still insist on watching it for its inventive storytelling and writing anyways. It's a good show, and one that I definitely recommend. In any case, this show is made by Smiley Guy Studios, specifically Jeremy Diamond. Smiley Guy Studios may sound familiar to those who have seen College Humor, as they worked on Furry Force. They also animated for an episode of Blackish. As for Jeremy Diamond, he was the producer for The Curse of Clara, A Holiday Tale, another project with Smiley Guy Studios, and produced a few shows such as Guidestones and Pillars of Freedom.
Maganzo! What?
Now that you have heard those 5 seconds, you can understand why Maganzo is one of the worst shut-up cartoons in this entire retrospective. There are shows that showcase some sense of logic but have random things happen in it, like Oishi High School Battle or Pubertina. There are shows where random things happen each episode and you roll with it, like Munroe, Teleporting Fat Guy, or Politicats. And then there's this one, where it seems like every other line just had a keyboard mashing added to it, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. This is the final Brian Weisel cartoon we're covering in this retrospective, and my god, this was a downfall compared to the first 2. It had very little views and mixed reception. But what's this one about? Honestly, I couldn't get a good grasp of it. From what I can gather, it's about a He-Man-esque figure with a magic sword that tries to defeat an evil wizard. But honestly, I couldn't stand this one. What are its problems? Well, the animation is a lot slower than something like Munroe or Icons of Teen, making it a rather boring watch. It feels like a picture book made from MS Paint at some points. Next off, it's stupid. It's really, really stupid. Even compared to other shut-up cartoons like Politicats, it's so stupid. And while a lot of it comes from the pacing and the quality of the writing itself, there's no doubt that the main problem comes from these 2 side characters. They're called She-Bear and Dr. McTardigan, and they're the most annoying things in this entire retrospective. More than Debbie from Pubertina, and more than Dipster from Weasel Town. All they do is make annoying sounds over and over, and that's it. It gets really old, really fast. And other than that, not much interesting happens in the show. Like, there are a few jokes here and there, but Munroe did any and all of these jokes better than this show. Even when it comes to ironic enjoyment, Pubertina did it a lot better. It really feels on the level of Weasel Town, despite having less consistent quality in terms of character designs and animations. Now, is this as bad as Weasel Town? I'd say maybe not. In fact, while it is an annoying show, it only lasted 3 episodes, which is really merciful. Speaking of, the show being worse than Munroe and Icons of Teen wasn't Brian Weisel's fault. In fact, it seems to be Defy Media's fault, as Maganzo originally aired in 2010 for Channel101.com, and it was just splattered onto the channel. It wasn't supposed to be for June 19, 2015. Something similar can be said for another short that Brian Weisel did called The Staff of Gerloff, which was made in 2014 and was aired in 2015 on the channel as well. We won't be covering it in this retrospective, since it's gone from the channel, and it really only had 2 episodes.
We'll take great care of him, and someday maybe he'll make us real proud and star in movies with Chris Pratt.
Super Smosh was the final big hit of the channel, consistently making millions of views with most of its videos. With that, it also had a really high approval rating. The show stars Ian and Anthony, who come across a being named Marley, who gives them the power to summon anything from any video games they've ever played. With this, they save the world, from things that they cause themselves most of the time, or just goof around. This show walked so that glitch text could run. Alright, what are my gripes and praises of the show? Well, the character models are not that great. I mean, especially compared to something like Alfred and Poe, where they're all animals and therefore you just have to make them look like animals. Like, where the hell are their noses? Season 2 doesn't give them noses, but it does update their design a little bit. Aside from that, the actual animation of the characters is really good. It's often very funny and expressive. I could also say the same thing for all the video game powers, characters, and sprites, which are often really well done. What about the writing? Well, it's very similar to Alfred and Poe, but with Ian and Anthony as personalities. It basically means that it's just Smosh with video game stuff inside, so it's just Smosh. But to give it credit, it is different from regular Smosh with wackier scenarios and visuals that work well with the art style. I think that things like Smoshamon could work well in a live-action animation hybrid, but other things like Nintega, You Got the Glitch, and Octopus Rift seem to work better in this art style. Either way, it's pretty enjoyable, and I liked it better than Smosh Babies at least. The chemistry between Ian and Anthony is pretty well recognized, and Marley, while not the most interesting, is a good third character. The video game references themselves are pretty basic. They're basically all the ones that you'd see College Humor or dorkly make fun of. I think it's kinda weird that they had an ultimate gaming console in the show and they called it the Nintega. Like, the only Sega references I saw were Sonic and a nod to Crazy Taxi. I also find it pretty annoying that these cartoons keep on trying to give Anthony love interests, from Oishi on the channel to several in Smosh Babies and now this show. I don't know why it bugs me, but it does. You wanna know what also bugs me? Some of these plots are pretty basic. The writing's fine, but for the most part, there are episodes that annoy me a bit. The Smoshimon episode specifically, because it just feels like a less effort, less entertaining food battle. Overall though, I'd say that this is pretty good. I'd say it's the perfect midpoint between the enjoyment I have with teleporting fat guys and the annoyance I had with Smosh Babies.
Hey, taxi!
These last shows have a similar story to something like Lights the Zoo or Uberdude. They were made either prior to the channel and were added on just cuz, or they were made by a team rather than individuals, and they mainly branched the team name a lot instead of hiding it till the end credits, like with a lot of other shut-up cartoons. The three teams responsible for these last shows are Sonic Bunny Productions, Big 50, and Zack Creative, originally called Zacktoons, with Zack Creative making most of them, including this one. It got the same 100,000 views that a non-Smosh shut-up cartoon would get, and the same generally positive reception too. The content of this show is that someone's trying to ride a cab somewhere, but they end up getting a wacky cab driver with a different quirk each time. Hijinks ensue. And this summary couldn't be any more basic if it tried. Not only because it summarizes the concept very well, but also because this is the shortest shut-up cartoon per episode. They last around 1 minute long, while the others lasted around 3 or so. This also means that there isn't a lot to talk about for this one. I like the designs of the environments, because of its outside the outline style. But that's basically all I can say about the art. It's pretty standard looking, but I like it nonetheless. There are a few things I don't really like about it though. The camera isn't consistent, and it's disorientating to look at sometimes. It zooms in and out randomly, and sometimes it just isn't that good to watch. The sound effects might be worse though. While it isn't the only one of Zack Creative's works to have this problem, it's definitely the one that has this problem the worst. The sound effects are obnoxious and annoying most of the time. Like when they use it to emphasize or express something, which is fine by itself, but they use it so much that it becomes annoying. As for the writing itself, it's pretty hit or miss. Sometimes there's some gross or sexual stuff, but other times there isn't, and I prefer those overall. My favorite episode is this one with the mobster because of how funny the ending is. But yeah, that's it. Again, I don't really have much to say about this one, but I will say I wasn't ungodly bored, and I laughed more than a few times, so I don't consider this show a total loss. But I do prefer more than a few shows compared to this one. Now here's a weird one. Scream Engine Form was a webtoon originally aired on Super Deluxe, a webtoon-based entertainment company created in 2008 and owned by Turner Broadcasting. When it was airing, it was famous for shows like China, Illinois. Then, after Super Deluxe was folded into AdultSwim.com, a lot of the shows originally done on the network fled to different channels, like this one did. After a while though, Super Deluxe had a small revival in 2015, with shows like Tim and Eric and Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. It then got rebranded into Tatered, and they do stuff, I think. In any case, Scream Engine 4 was one of those shows that fled to another channel, and, in this case, it was Shut Up Cartoons. In fact, because of this, it's usually seen as the last Shut Up cartoon, with a lot of sources saying so, despite the fact that we have 4 more left. In any case, what's this about? Well, an evil wizard named Zeldaron had kidnapped the princess to further his evil plans, and to save her and the world, the scrawny Prince Axe Battledum, son of the king, ventures to save her with the help of a flying robotic horse named Kit, based off of Knight Rider. The first thing immediately to know about the show is the pixel art style it has going on. It's incredibly reminiscent of King's Quest, and does a good job being retro, especially compared to other shows like Super Smosh. But art smart. What about the show itself? Well, the pacing and writing is surprisingly engaging. It wasn't the best at all times, but this is one of the shows that I don't necessarily mind putting in regular speed. The characters are really entertaining. I like how the prince is this little naive tool that doesn't know anything about the real world, and therefore gets trapped more often than not. I like how he's annoying to the world, and not necessarily us as the audience, though his voice sometimes crosses the line. Kit works very well as a straight man to all the prince's antics, while still being subjugated with the fact that he's a horse for the prince. The princess being jaded and impure gets a few laughs out of me, and so does Zeldaron when dealing with her, but most of the comedic moments do come from Kit and the prince. The only thing I could say about the overarching story that I don't particularly like is that the story ended on a cliffhanger that ended up being unresolved. And to be fair, it only really needed one episode to conclude it all. There's not really much else to be concluded. I will say that I feel like I'm at a loss for words now, and that's only because this show has much more quality overall than the rest of the cartoons so far. Even shows like Oishi and Krogzilla don't match the sort of quality that Scream Engine Engine 4 has. How do I even describe this? Like, obviously this show wasn't made with the intention that it was going to be a shut-up cartoon, and it therefore didn't have the power of Smosh's popularity to write on it, and it shows with how in-depth and polished it is overall. So yeah, I like this show a bit, but will this trend continue of having shows from different places that happen to be branded being good? In any case, this show is made by Big 50, but the man behind this brand is named Harris Callahan. He's a man who's done a lot of individual projects after Scream Engine 4, which he worked with alongside Matt Laster, who I really can't find any info for, including a lot of promotional material for Cartoon Network, including work on Squidbillies and Level Up, and nowadays he does projects with Georgia Tech, including making an April Fool's demo of a twin-stick shooter called Buzz Blitz Full Yellow Jacket. Our next show by Zack Creative collaborating with Screen Australia is called God Squad, another show that gets lumped in with being the final shut-up cartoon, despite not actually being so. As for the show itself, I'm not sure if it was meant to be a pilot season or a pilot episode cut up into different parts, but it definitely feels like a pilot in how they try to set up things. Then again, it had a similar energy to With Zombies, and how they technically do have a full story in place, but it teases that it could have so much more. I really wish I could find more info with the show in general, but as we've already covered, shut-up cartoons and information don't necessarily go hand in hand. In any case, after all this time, this was the one shut-up cartoon I was waiting for, because my god, God Squad is such a damn good show. In fact, it's probably the best shut-up cartoon out of all of them. The show's about a place called King's Cross, where a bunch of spiritual beings and gods from all types of religions were forced to live together. In there, a detective squad consisting of veteran Ganesh, the muscle Freja, and the rookie Xenu try to investigate the cause of gods being murdered left and right. The story itself is rather basic. To be fair, they only really had 24 minutes to tell this story, and for what they did, there's a lot to appreciate, though I won't spoil it. I will say that it's clever in a lot of ways, and the mystery they tell is rather interesting. A really good compliment I can give to this show is how interconnected the world really is in terms of religious references. Zeus being a pervert and turning into a goose for the fun times, Sun Wukong trying to do whatever he can to obtain godlike power, Ganesh being sensitive about his elephant head, the fact that the mayors of this area are the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit respectively. It's all really cool. The world they live in is rather mature compared to most of the other shows. I mean, prostitution is one of the running themes in this show, along with murder and shady activities, but it's not like Oishi where kills are done for the gory spectacle or the possible reaction, except in the case of Xenu. It's more for the surprise element. The characters each have their own charms, which leads to them either being really funny or really interesting. I already mentioned Zeus and his horn dog behavior, but there's also the fact that his head getting injured leads to Athena popping out and saving him. I also kinda like all the elephant jokes that they make with Ganesh, like his fear of mice. Freja's warrior mentality is also very funny, along with Xenu just failing at everything. And I can't believe it took me this long to get to it, but then there's the animation. I feel like this show does a better job in general of mixing 2D assets with real life, because the shading and the zooming of the camera really works to make them seem like they're really there. There's also a lot of cases where they insert 3D objects as well, and they all create a very dark yet bright setting, appropriate of that of what King's Cross tries to do. Then again, Oishi does have human actors interact with 2D characters, so that's respectable in its own right. Out of all the shows in this retrospective, not only do I like it the most, but I will say that it's really bingeable. Sure, you can watch the parts separately, but they released a movie version of the show with all of them combined. And out of all the cartoons, I want to rewatch this one the most, even more than Krogzilla or Oishi, and there's a good reason for it. It's funny, it's interesting, it's well made, and it's a wonderful watch for anyone interested. I can't recommend this one enough. In fact, it's one of the few shut-up cartoons to get a nomination for an award, other than Krogzilla and Do's and Don'ts. The Australian Academy for Cinema and Television Arts, or the AACTA Awards, nominated this show for Best Short Animation. Nicholas Kemp was the executive producer of this show, and he later went on to direct shows like Binge Inferno and Yo Oasis. So, we've come a long way, and after this show, there are only 2 left to cover, both by Zack Creative. This one was made by an animation studio called Sonic Bunny, called An Okay Place to Eat. Just for clarification, what did I say was Snowjacked as soon as I finished Krogzilla? From the heavens to the hells? What a naive fool I was. This is the worst shut-up cartoon there is. Worse than Maganzo, really freaking embarrassing, and Weasel Town. And surprisingly, unlike all the other shows up here that I consider good or decent, like Scream Engine 4, God Squad, or even Crazy Cabbies and Uberdude, this has the most documentation associated with its production. By this, I mean they have a Bible for this pilot that discusses all the characters, their motivations and backstories, and potential storylines that they can cover. Let me restate that I will never disrespect the hard work that goes into a webtoon. We'll get into it as each point goes by, so let's not stall. Similarly to Maganzo, this wasn't originally made for Shut Up Cartoons. It was made in 2010 and released on the Sonic Bunny channel in 2012. To be fair, it got more views on the Shut Up Cartoons channel, but it otherwise seemed worthless. This entire cartoon was a pilot for a show that was split into 5 parts. This is problem 1. The fact that it was just a pilot split into parts is rather annoying for this show in particular. It means that the characters don't interact as much between episodes. I mean, the only characters that get good screen time are the Inspector, Little Delilah, Sergeant Cereal, and the Gnomes. To be fair, I kinda blame the channel itself for that, as Sonic Bunny's YouTube channel has the full thing as a pilot. Then again, there are also the intros where one character says cartoons, and sometimes it drags on for a full quarter of the episode.
It's kind of like car toots! It toots! Tooty toots toot.
Another problem with this is that they left out the theme song, one that properly sets up everything more efficiently than the trailer did, and one that had no right to slap this hard.
An okay place to eat, a family-friendly treat.
Problem 2, in terms of plot stuff, everything feels dragged out for the story that they tell, yet insubstantial for what they do. Similarly to Weasel Town, the plot they were going for is that someone came on the floor and they have to find out who did it, and it takes until episode 5 to find that out. For the duration of this episode, you'd swear that it had to do with the crew dealing with the Inspector, but by the end of 5 parts, it introduces a new plot point that never gets fulfilled. And you can tell that this was supposed to be a plot point, because that's how it was presented. It's weird too, since the serial killer plot could have been more interesting. But hey, it is what it is. But holy moly, I haven't even explained the concept of this show. What it was originally supposed to be was that mascots 50 years past their prime all work at a diner where, say it with me now, hijinks ensue. To be fair, the plot of the runtime makes it not seem like that's the case, but it does spend some time on the concept. And by that, I mean problem 3. The characters are obvious jokes with nothing new to add to them. Like, a lot of the characters fall into extremely obvious jokes. Like, wow, Sugar Bear is high, who knew? The cute innocent girl isn't innocent and is instead rather raunchy? How subversive. The man who gives treats to kids is a pervert. Never would've guessed. Not to mention it's ungodly unfunny. Just like Weasel Town, I didn't laugh once watching this, even out of irony. A lot of the jokes that could be considered funny are all unfunny sexual jokes, as in molestation, blowjobs, and a prolonged scene of the Inspector tasting semen and liking it. It's like it's trying to be the next really freaking embarrassing with a quarter of the effort. Other times, it's fine, but nothing really groundbreaking. The animation feels like a mix between the stiffness of Snowjacked with the general design of Weasel Town. Though the character designs don't look too bad, they don't really look good, they're just kinda generic. Overall though, there's nothing here. It's unfunny, unoriginal, and uncreative. I'll even give credit to Weasel Town for the fact that even if it was boring, it at least succeeded in being a discount Sonic for hire with its setup and structure, even if it misses the follow through and goes nowhere. An okay place to eat doesn't succeed at its setup or structure. It goes nowhere and it wastes any potential that it had. I think that with a different setup and a different separation of episodes, this could be an okay show. There's definitely potential here, but the structure and the format wasn't suited for Shut Up Cartoons, and given its size, I'd say make it more like Hell of a Boss styled episodes, being 22 minutes in length or so. For now though, this one is a definite skip, and to be fair, a lot of people did skip out on this one. This show was made by Andrew Rocho and Evan Dannemiller. Evan Dannemiller has only done a Christian Stewart TMZ parody video as his only work other than An Okay Place to Eat. Andrew Rocho, on the other hand, has done a lot of work, doing effects in Mau Mau, Frankenhole, and Robot Chicken, and working on Moral Oral and Trip Tank. Next up is ABC with The Mob, another show that, yep, was created by Zach Creative. No filler, let's go. The main concept of this show is that the mob has to teach a classroom of kids about concepts like depression, strangers, and pets. And I will say, I think this show is pretty good. It's surprisingly really funny. I laughed harder here than any other Shut Up cartoon, and it's completely warranted. You see, in a lot of these shows, there's a setup of having someone be the weird one, followed by a straight man. As an example, Samurai Daycare has Ted be the weird one, with everyone else playing the straight man. In this show, however, they mix and match similarly to Do's and Don'ts, but I feel like this show does it a lot better. There are a lot of instances where the kids in Do's and Don'ts don't actually feel like kids, because they're less defined. They seemingly just do whatever the plot wants them to, turning them into less entertaining characters. In this show, both sides have a level of sanity and insanity. The mob's insanity comes from, well, being crime lords, and this is contrasted with the children's innocence. For example,
and that, my friends, is how Hansel and Gretel disposed of the witch's body.
And the children's insanity comes from, well, being children, and it's contrasted with the mob being adults. It means that each of them have some really funny lines and funny setups, and none of it is really inconsistent. For example,
Bobby?
Sally's a fat ass.
Bobby, now why would you say that about Sally?
Because I can't see my balls.
Because of this, the humor is definitely more grounded than Do's and Don'ts. The mob themselves is also full of interesting characters. The way that they're written reminds me of The Simpsons and Fat Tony's gang. They're the mob, but they're also kinda silly, and the show takes full advantage of it. I also like that the dynamic has the mob feel like they actually do want to teach kids about what they've learned, even though, you know, they're the mob. So it's all funny. That's nice. And this sounds okay, right? Well, it has some of the annoying background noise and sound effects that Crazy Cabbies had, and the art, while it is basic, is unappealing in some aspects, especially the kids. But besides that, I'd say this show definitely cracks the top 5. It really is that good. The director for the show, Troy Zafer, also directed God Squad, and all the other project Nicholas Kemp wanted to put in his IMDb. Jenna Cook is a mystery, and the only thing I could find on IMDb is a documentary called Somewhere Between. The final one. What's the show about? Well, it's basically Red Hot Riding Hood. You know that cartoon with the hot redhead and the wolf being, wowed by her? Except, since it's an adult webtoon, it gets taken to a lot of hilarious and absurd places. And yes, hijinks do indeed ensue. I'm surprised how little there is to say about this one, though. The art style is interesting, only having black, white, and red. It still uses annoying sound effects like Crazy Cabbies and ABC with the Mob. I'd argue it's better here, though, since there isn't any dialogue. Half of the plots I liked, and half of them I really didn't. Cause sometimes it was him wanting to do something romantic with harsh punishment for a small thing, but there are times where he overtly wants to do sexual stuff to Red, where the punishment is harsh enough. I think that the plots for this sort of show fit perfectly with the time limit of shut-up cartoons, but overall, One thing I do like is the ending. Minor spoilers here, but the ending has the wolf neutered, and when he does, he completely gets over the red girl, and it seems like the perfect way to end the series. Overall though, It was also produced by Troy Zafer and Jenna Cook. School's out, baby! Final thoughts time!
Game set!
This was a trek. It was such a goddamn trek that I don't even know where to start. But I will say it was a lot of crap. There are some shows where you can really feel the amount of time and talent that they put in, but it feels like the exception, because there are more shows that, while they've definitely had effort put into them, it doesn't feel like it. The same could go for others that were clear passion projects, and others that were just done for the memes. There are a lot of shows where calling them basic would be a compliment compared to others. There were diamonds in the rough, there was some fool's gold, but the most disappointing ones were when I found dull stones. Boredom seemed to be more egregious in these shows compared to being plain bad or annoying. I will say that I am glad that I enjoyed it more than I thought. The first two Brian Weissall shows, Uberdude and Teleporting Fat Guy, were ones that I didn't really watch when they were new, and I'm sorta glad that I watched them now. Not to mention revisiting shows like Krogzilla, Oishi, and God Squad were pretty good. Then again, revisiting shows like Really Friggin' Embarrassing, Weasel Town, and An Okay Place to Eat weren't great, but you know, the good with the bad. My personal opinions aside, you can tell that a lot of people with these projects try to put their first steps forward. Even shows I didn't like, it's clear that a good few of them do have lots of effort put into them. It's a shame that viewer burnout was so strong after Oishi, with the exception of the few Smosh shows. Any show that wasn't directly advertised by Smosh in some way was awful. Sometimes it was logarithmically down, as a good third of the overall subscribers watched, and then it plateaued at around a 20th at best. Sometimes it just never got a leg up, stuck at 20,000 for its run. For something as big as Smosh, sure it was a downgrade, but for all these new creators, it was a leg up for them. I already talked about how some of the creators of this show went on to do great things, like with Pubertina, Krogzilla, and Nature Break, but even just getting shows on the channel helped it give the moderate success that it wouldn't have gotten originally. But besides that, there is another reason as to why I covered these. I mean, the lack of any consistent documentation is a clear one, and the only show that really got covered in capacity publicity from this marathon was the Oishi High School battle, so it's nice to have this documentation available for the world. But there's also the fact that while we're in a resurgence of internet animation, there's also a lot of problems that were and are still happening. While storytime animations and big ones like Hell of a Boss got lots of viewership and praise, the fact that animation wasn't profitable has become a big problem on the internet, especially in terms of preservation. Machinima was a channel with 12 million subscribers, 6 times the amount of that of Shut Up Cartoons. And after Super Best Friends ended on their run with their finale, Machinima didn't have much to do and they deleted all their content. When products like Sandy Not Included, Lowbrow Shows, Minecraft The Noob Adventures, and Happy Hour Saloon are deleted for good and lost to the ether just like that, it really puts into perspective how unchronicled these shows could be, and business shenanigans are the tip of the iceberg of what could happen to some of these shows. As an example, when it turned out that numbers were being inflated for dorky content, leading to not a lot of financial support, people straight up deleting their older content from their channel and hiding their older content behind a paywall, and people making modern animation like Teleporte being taken down for being adult while YouTube's kids cartoons are running amok, it's important to remember and chronicle these series and shows, because they represent a microcosm of internet history, not just with the current events that are referenced, but they also showed a side of YouTube that screwed many over, even one of the biggest YouTube channels ever. These are a testament to that, as well as the chronicling of many studios and people who wouldn't have gotten a leg up if it wasn't for this channel, a success and a failure wrapped into one.